Claire had everything people pretended to want. Money, a fiancé who looked perfect in pictures, and the kind of arrogance that made others shrink when she walked by. She stepped into the private hangar that morning wearing her usual confidence like armor. The helicopter she used for short hops to the city sat idle, lights blinking, control panel frozen. She clicked her tongue impatiently as mechanics scrambled to look busy. That's when she saw him, Eli, the janitor, kneeling beside the craft with a small toolkit. His coveralls were worn, his hands rough, but his movements were precise, calm, deliberate. Claire let out a small laugh that echoed through the metal walls. They've got the janitor fixing my helicopter now. What's next? The gardener flying it? The nearby workers pretended not to hear. Eli didn't look up, didn't defend himself, just adjusted a wire and murmured something about a voltage mismatch. Within minutes, the control screen lit back to life. Claire's fiancé Ryan arrived then, sunglasses, flight jacket, and a smile that existed mostly for cameras. He threw an arm around her shoulder, joked about blue-collar miracles, and led her away. She rolled her eyes, pretending not to notice how Eli quietly cleaned his tools and stepped aside. She didn't thank him. She didn't even acknowledge him. To her, he was part of the background, a blur of workers whose names she'd never learn. As the helicopter blades started spinning, Claire climbed in, proud again. The world looked smaller from up here. She thought of herself as someone destined to rise, never the kind who looked down long enough to see the people holding her up. From the air, the hangar was just a gray box fading into distance, and the janitor who fixed what others couldn't was already forgotten. What she didn't see was how the chief mechanic glanced at Eli afterward. "You just saved her again," he muttered. Eli shrugged. "Machines don't care who owns them. Just who understands them." It wasn't bitterness. It was truth spoken by someone who'd seen arrogance crumble more than once. In the office later, Claire bragged to her assistant about how the tech team finally did their job. She never knew the senior technician hadn't even touched the system. Eli had. She laughed again, the same short laugh that always followed when she felt superior. That sound would return to haunt her one day. Ryan joined her for lunch, talking about expansion plans, new contracts, social events. He liked to be admired, and she liked being envied. They were perfect for each other on paper, polished smiles, empty warmth, matching egos. He spoke about an upcoming trip to Monaco, the kind that looked good on social media. She listened just enough to stay interested, already planning what dress would make her look like she belonged next to a man who lived for being photographed. To the people who worked under her, she was known as efficient but cold. She demanded results, not conversation. The janitor became a quiet rumor, the one who actually kept the place running while executives took the credit. Sometimes the mechanics joked that he should be chief engineer. He never laughed. He'd been an engineer once, before the world decided he was easier to discard than to defend. Back at the hangar, the wind picked up dust and engine smoke. Eli worked late, cleaning, checking, repairing what others ignored. His world was quiet, but it made sense. Machines broke for clear reasons, people broke for selfish ones. He saw both kinds every day. Claire's laughter still echoed faintly in his memory, not because it hurt but because it reminded him how easily people forgot what mattered. He'd learned to let their pride slide off him like oil off steel. The next morning, Claire returned to the hangar for another short flight. She didn't see Eli at first, but she noticed the helicopter looked freshly polished, the gauges calibrated. She boarded without hesitation, her reflection flashing briefly across the smooth metal. She caught herself smiling, content, untouchable, untarnished. The world, she thought, worked best when everyone stayed in their place. As the rotors lifted her into the air again, the city shimmered below, unaware of how fragile her kind of power really was. People like Eli never entered her thoughts long enough to matter. Yet somewhere beneath those spinning blades, he was already rewriting her story, just by being the one who fixed what others only pretended to understand. Claire's days blurred into meetings, luxury dinners, and appearances that demanded constant perfection. She'd built her life like a brand, every gesture rehearsed, every word calculated. Ryan looked perfect beside her, the kind of man who photographed well and spoke in practiced charm. But underneath that glossy surface, there was a steady hum of emptiness she tried not to notice. He was affectionate in public, distant in private. When she reached for him, he reached for his phone. When she spoke, he half listened, nodding while scrolling through unread messages. She told herself it was normal. Successful people were busy. Love was just another kind of maintenance. The helicopter started acting up again. Minor issues, strange noises, control lag. Claire complained to management, irritated that her schedule was being disrupted. When she returned to the hangar, she expected a team of specialists waiting. Instead, she found Eli again, tightening a bolt with quiet precision. He didn't look up. He didn't seem offended by her presence or her earlier mockery. He simply worked until the noise stopped. "It's fixed," he said softly, not for credit, just for completion. For the first time, Claire looked at him longer than a passing second. His face was calm, focused, and there was a steadiness that made her uncomfortable. She wanted to say something dismissive, but instead she found herself asking if he was sure it would hold. "Machines rarely fail," he replied, "but people stop listening before they do." She didn't know if that was advice or a warning. That night, she noticed Ryan texting someone during dinner. He smiled in that particular way he used to when they first met, but now the smile wasn't directed at her. She wanted to believe it was business, yet the quiet ache in her stomach said otherwise. Pride stopped her from asking questions. Instead, she laughed too loudly at his jokes, poured another glass of wine, and pretended everything was fine. Days later, Eli passed her in the corridor, carrying a box of tools. She hesitated before nodding at him. It was the smallest acknowledgement, but his slight smile felt heavier than she expected. Her assistant caught the moment and teased her lightly afterward, "Did you just smile at the janitor?" Claire brushed it off, but the comment lingered. She hated that she felt anything at all. Rumors about Ryan began trickling through the company, whispers of late-night flights and mysterious passengers. Claire ignored them until she overheard two employees mentioning her fiancé and her assistant in the same sentence. She wanted to explode, but she couldn't afford to. Appearances mattered more than truth. She told herself people were jealous. Still, she checked his messages while he showered, and the truth stared back. Hidden names, secret meetings, the language of betrayal written between the lines. Her first reaction wasn't heartbreak, it was humiliation. How could he do this to her, someone who had given him status, access, prestige? The idea that she could be replaced by someone she paid infuriated her more than it hurt her. She threw the phone onto the bed, refusing to cry. Tears were for people without power. The next morning, she went to work like nothing had happened. But under her crisp suit and polished calm, her hands trembled. She arrived early at the hangar, needing air, or maybe escape. Eli was there again, wiping grease from his hands, humming to himself. He glanced up, noticing the redness around her eyes but said nothing. That silence felt safer than sympathy. She stood beside the helicopter, pretending to check the rotors while her thoughts spiraled. "You ever fix something that keeps breaking?" she asked suddenly. Eli paused, then said, "Sometimes it's not the machine, it's how people treat it." The simplicity of his words stung. For the first time, she didn't feel like the one with authority. Her pride cracked further that afternoon when she saw Ryan walking her assistant to his car, their laughter quiet but intimate. She turned away before they noticed her. Inside, she was breaking, but the mask stayed in place. She greeted clients, approved projects, smiled for photos. The show went on. Eli saw her again that evening, standing near the helicopter with her heels dangling from one hand. She looked tired in a way no makeup could hide. He didn't ask why. He just handed her a folded handkerchief from his pocket and walked off. She stared at it, wondering why that simple act felt more human than anything Ryan had given her in months. Later, her curiosity got the better of her. She asked around about Eli and learned pieces of his story. Once an engineer, scapegoated in a corporate fraud case, license revoked, reputation destroyed. He'd taken a janitor job to survive. It shocked her, not because of what happened to him, but because she realized she'd never considered that the people she overlooked had histories, talents, dignity. She'd built a world that made others invisible. The next day, she walked past him again. "Thank you," she said quietly. It was a small word, but it carried more weight than she expected. He nodded. No smile, just a flicker of acknowledgement, like someone recognizing a signal in the dark. That night, she sat alone in her apartment, staring at her engagement ring. The diamond caught the city lights and sparkled like a lie. She thought about Ryan, about his betrayal, about the image she'd built around him. She thought about Eli's calm voice, his quiet confidence, his lack of need to impress. The contrast gnawed at her. She'd spent her whole life chasing validation, and yet the only person who saw her without judgment was someone she once laughed at. In the weeks that followed, she spoke less, observed more. Her assistant avoided her gaze now, and Ryan's explanations grew shorter. Claire started showing up at the hangar earlier, under the excuse of overseeing maintenance. She didn't talk much, but she watched Eli work. There was something grounding about the way he treated every problem, as if everything could be repaired if you took it apart carefully enough. She envied that calm. She wanted to believe she could fix her life the same way, piece by piece, wire by wire, until it made sense again. But she knew some things don't go back the way they were. Pride was one of them. The woman who once laughed at the janitor had started to see him as something else, a mirror, reflecting everything she didn't want to admit about herself. And though she didn't realize it yet, that quiet shift was the beginning of her undoing. The morning of the corporate demonstration arrived with tension disguised as excitement. Claire was determined to look composed, to show the world that nothing in her perfect life had cracked. Ryan stood beside her, charming as ever, but she could feel the distance like a glass wall. Between them, the helicopter gleamed under the hangar lights, freshly serviced, perfect on the outside, like them. When the control light flickered mid-flight, panic rippled through her chest. Ryan's voice was calm, but his eyes betrayed fear. They landed hard but safe, an emergency descent that left her shaken and silent. Later, when the technicians swarmed the aircraft, she saw Eli standing quietly in the background. For a second, she met his eyes, and something about his expression told her this malfunction wasn't just mechanical. Ryan exploded afterward, accusing the maintenance crew of incompetence, singling out Eli with venom. He needed someone to blame, and the janitor was the easiest target. Claire didn't defend him. Pride kept her silent while Ryan's anger filled the room. Eli said nothing. He just looked at them both with the same calm that had once irritated her. When he left the hangar, Claire felt a hollow pit form in her chest, one she couldn't name yet. 2 days later, Eli requested a quiet meeting with her. She hesitated but agreed. He handed her a small envelope containing printed photos, grainy, time-stamped images from the hangar's security cameras. In them, Ryan stood beside her assistant inside the helicopter, hands around her waist, lips close, smiling. The dates matched nights when Ryan had claimed to be working late. The same helicopter she rode in proudly, the one she flaunted as a symbol of success, had been the stage for her humiliation. Her heart didn't break. It imploded, folding in on itself under the weight of betrayal and irony. Eli didn't offer comfort. He only said, "You should know what's being said about you before everyone else does." His voice was steady, stripped of pity. She couldn't look him in the eyes. The photos trembled in her hands. Her first instinct was denial. This had to be doctored, exaggerated, but she knew it wasn't. Every pixel felt real. Every smirk, every embrace was a nail in the coffin of the life she'd built. When she confronted Ryan, he smirked, half amused, half defiant. "You're overreacting," he said. It was nothing. Nothing. That word detonated in her chest. She asked about the flight logs, the unauthorized trips. He denied everything until she showed the photos. The charm drained from his face, replaced by anger. "You think that janitor is some kind of hero? He's trying to ruin me." He stormed out before she could reply, leaving her surrounded by silence and shame. She sat there, staring at her reflection in the office window. For the first time, she saw herself as others might have, a woman who'd mocked kindness, who mistook cruelty for strength, and who now stood stripped of both. The laughter she once used as armor now echoed in her memory like something cruel and childish. She thought about the hangar, the way Eli's hands had moved with care, the way he'd spoken about machines and people. She had laughed then. Now she couldn't. Rumors spread fast. The scandal leaked. Photos, whispers, gossip disguised as concern. Board members questioned her leadership. Clients postponed meetings. The perfect image she'd built was fracturing in real time. Ryan's betrayal wasn't private anymore. The assistant resigned, claiming emotional distress. Ryan tried to shift blame, but the truth clawed its way out anyway. The company began investigating misuse of aircraft and falsified maintenance records. When Eli's name came up, it was only to confirm that he wasn't involved. He had fixed what Ryan had broken, literally and otherwise. Claire realized that the man she dismissed as a nobody had not only saved her helicopter but was now saving what remained of her reputation by proving what really happened. She felt gratitude tangled with humiliation. The person she'd once mocked had become her last line of honesty. The confrontation she once feared came at the company gala. Ryan tried to corner her with charm, pretending nothing had changed. The crowd glowed with champagne and gossip, waiting for the next scene in her downfall. But something inside her had hardened into clarity. She waited until the music softened, then spoke, measured, controlled. She exposed everything: the unauthorized flights, the affair, the falsified logs, and when she held up the photos, silence fell heavy enough to be heard. Ryan's face drained of color. The assistant fled. The applause that followed wasn't celebration, it was judgment disguised as relief. For a long moment after, Claire just stood there, motionless. She didn't feel victorious. She didn't feel vindicated, only hollow, as if revenge couldn't fill the emptiness betrayal left behind. She thought of Eli again. How he never raised his voice, how he never demanded credit, how he simply fixed what was broken. She finally understood what he meant when he said people stopped listening before things failed. She had done that her entire life. She hadn't listened until it was too late. Later, in the quiet of her office, she stared at the ring Ryan had given her. It looked ridiculous now, a shiny symbol of everything false. She left it on the desk, beside a note for HR requesting his dismissal. It wasn't vengeance, it was cleanup. Like fixing a faulty engine, it had to be done so the system could function again. When she walked through the hangar the next day, people looked at her differently, not with fear, but with curiosity. She didn't wear the arrogance that used to shield her. She saw Eli at the far end, checking a control board. Their eyes met briefly, and she nodded once. He nodded back, nothing more. That silent acknowledgement carried more weight than all her previous apologies combined. She knew her reputation was cracked beyond repair, but strangely, she didn't care. For the first time, she wasn't trying to control the story. She just wanted to stop lying. To others, to herself. The helicopter sat grounded for inspection, quiet and still, its reflection sharp against the hangar floor. It wasn't lost on her that the machine had survived, while her illusion of perfection hadn't. In the end, it wasn't the crash that broke her. It was the discovery that the life she'd built was running on falsified parts, smiles, promises, loyalty that only lasted until something shinier came along. The janitor she once laughed at had seen through it all, not because he wanted to, but because people who work with broken things learn to recognize cracks long before they split. The woman who once believed she was untouchable was now grounded, stripped of status, stripped of illusion. And though she didn't know it yet, that fall was the beginning of her first honest ascent. Weeks passed after the scandal, and the noise around Claire's name began to fade, replaced by polite silence and half-forgotten gossip. Ryan was gone, fired, disgraced, and replaced by someone who didn't have his charm but knew how to do the job. The assistant vanished too, leaving only whispers behind. For the first time in her life, Claire wasn't the center of admiration or envy, she was the subject of caution, a reminder that even the untouchable can fall. She spent her mornings in quiet routine, the phone rarely ringing, the once constant stream of invitations reduced to none. The stillness forced her to sit with herself, something she'd avoided for years. The arrogance that used to fill every silence was gone. She no longer filled her sentences with superiority or her days with displays of control. For the first time, she realized how much energy she had spent pretending to be perfect. She had worn success like armor, and confusion like pride. Without the noise of attention, she saw her own reflection for what it was: tired, human, flawed, and finally real. One morning, she visited the hangar unannounced. It wasn't business. She didn't owe explanations anymore. She simply wanted to see the place that had become the quiet witness to her fall. The hangar was alive with movement, mechanics, engineers, and workers doing what they did best, invisible and necessary. Eli stood near the back, fixing an aircraft panel, focused as always. She walked toward him, her steps slower than before, her pride no longer leading the way. When he looked up, there was no tension, no awkwardness, just acknowledgement. She thanked him, not for the repairs, not for the photos, not for saving her job. Just a simple thank you for being the one person who never humiliated her when he had every reason to. He listened quietly as she spoke, then said, "Machines can be fixed. People take longer." It wasn't said with sympathy, only understanding. That truth settled deep in her chest. She nodded, not because she agreed but because she finally understood what it meant. She began helping around the company in small ways, listening more, delegating less, asking questions she once thought beneath her. It wasn't an act of redemption, it was survival. Every day she rebuilt pieces of her dignity, not through power but through humility. People started talking to her differently, less fear, more respect. It was subtle but real. The same workers she'd ignored for years now met her eyes instead of lowering theirs. Eli kept his distance, not out of coldness but because he didn't need to be part of her transformation. His role in her story was done, but his presence remained a quiet reminder of what decency looked like when no one was watching. She watched him work sometimes, fascinated by the ease of his focus, the grace of doing something right without needing applause. It made her realize how loud her own insecurity had been, how much she'd measured worth by attention instead of substance. Months later, she launched a new project, a program that funded technical training for underpaid maintenance staff. It wasn't for redemption or image repair. It was practical, necessary, and strangely fulfilling. She didn't put her name on it publicly, she didn't need to. She'd learned that doing good quietly was worth more than being admired loudly. One evening, while reviewing progress reports, she received an internal memo. Eli had been offered a promotion. Head of Safety Engineering. He hadn't asked for it, but his work made the decision obvious. She signed the approval without hesitation and added a small handwritten note, "For the one who fixes what others overlook." When she saw him the next day, she didn't mention it. He only smiled slightly, understanding anyway. She still flew occasionally, though she now sat in silence instead of flaunting it as luxury. The first time she stepped back into the same helicopter, she felt a faint chill of memory, the laughter, the arrogance, the old version of herself who believed she was untouchable. But this time, she didn't feel power. She felt balance. She'd learned that flight wasn't about control, it was about trust. The craft stayed steady, the air smooth. The machine that once carried her pride now carried her awareness. The media never gave her a redemption arc. There were no dramatic interviews or teary apologies. The world simply moved on, and she led it. She didn't chase validation anymore. The people who mattered saw her differently, and those who didn't were irrelevant. Her laughter changed too, softer, quieter, no longer sharp. It came naturally now, like something earned rather than performed. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the hangar windows, she caught her reflection on the glass of the helicopter's door. For a moment, she didn't see the executive or the fallen star, just a woman who'd been broken and rebuilt by her own mistakes. The image didn't bother her anymore. It looked honest. She smiled faintly, then turned away, leaving behind the sound of tools, engines, and the hum of life continuing as it should. She thought about the journey, the arrogance that blinded her, the betrayal that shattered her, and the quiet man who reminded her that strength wasn't loud. Every moment, every humiliation, every painful truth had carved away the parts of her that didn't belong. She no longer needed to rise above others to feel valuable. She had finally learned how to stand beside them. As she left the hangar, Eli was still there, tightening bolts, focused as ever. She called out softly, "You ever get tired of fixing things?" He looked up briefly and said, "Not when they stay fixed." She smiled, understanding the deeper meaning. He wasn't just talking about machines. The air outside was warm and quiet. She walked away without looking back, knowing that for the first time, her story didn't need to be rewritten or defended. It had found its ending, not in revenge or validation, but in balance. She had once laughed at the janitor fixing her helicopter. Now she understood that he hadn't just repaired a machine, he had repaired the very thing she thought couldn't break, her sense of who she was. The world didn't notice her change, but it didn't have to. Some transformations aren't meant to be seen, they're meant to be lived. And as the rotors turned in the distance, steady and sure, she realized she was finally free, not from failure, but from the version of herself who believed she'd never fall. She would not realize for a long time that every small act of mockery builds a quiet debt, and every laugh at someone beneath you becomes an echo waiting for its return. For now, she was still flying high, still laughing at the janitor who fixed her helicopter, still sure that the world would never turn against her. But arrogance always writes its own ending, and her first line had already been written the moment she laughed.